They're capturing data initially in 1-hour snapshots, and I make the note, software changeable. Currently, you can go down to every 15 minutes, that you can take a snapshot of 15 minutes of data instead of an hour. There's nothing that says with a software upload they couldn't make that 5 minutes or 1 minute or real time. That's just a software change. They transmit data initially 6 times per day, and it's been announced in the press, each one of those transmissions, 4 seconds long. Again, software changeable. It could be 20 times a day, it could be constant. It's whatever they want it to be. It's software driven. There's the piece of equipment called a service switch, and I call it optional because it's optional, but most utilities are electing to get it. This is the piece of equipment that David talked about that could actually turn off your power. The service switch is designed ostensibly to allow the utility to turn the service off if somebody moves out, or for non-bill payment, or somebody new moves in, and then they can remotely turn it on. So there's some good ideas behind the service switch, but the reality is once you can turn service off, you can turn it off for any reason. Or no reason. It could be a hacker, it could be, terrorists. So it's designed for remote connect, disconnect, and prepayment type metering, but it can be used in a lot of other ways. So let's look a little bit closer at this remote connect, disconnect switch, which has kind of developed over time a euphemism of a kill switch, because it's killing your power. So the utility can set a command to disconnect all service, ostensibly due to moves or bill non-payment. This next feature, software can be programmed to disconnect service automatically if usage threshold is exceeded. This is the rationing that David is talking about. Now, it's initially promoted, and I don't even know if consumers have even talked about this yet. Other utilities are doing this, and I've even seen their RFPs, their request for proposal. This functionality has been requested. Utilities want this. They want to be able to set a threshold that if you go beyond that usage, they just cut your power. This is automatic. This is software driven, no humans involved. It hits that threshold, your power's dead. You lose all power. Now, it's again, in these other places, presented as if you want to pay a little bit less for your energy and say, we'll comply with using less and get a lower price in exchange for limiting our usage, and just in case we forget or whatever and go over, we allow you to set this threshold and shut us down. But it's there. It can be used for rationing. It's a capability in the connect-disconnect switch. There's also, in the RFP for other places, they ask for a penalty period. So once you have been disconnected, it stays off for a certain amount of time as punishment for going over your threshold. It's in an RFP, it's something utilities want to be able to do. Hackers can make use of this kill switch. If you can shut people down, all you need is a little keyboard or hack in with a cell phone, and guess what? You can use the kill switch to shut off as many people as you want. There's another piece of equipment that's inherent in the way these smart meters work. It's called a switching mode power supply, SMPS. The main reason you have this in these devices is because power is coming in at 120 volts or 240 volts, and the little microelectronics inside the meter only need tiny little bits of power. They don't need that much power in order to run. So you need a translator to break down this high amount of voltage into the 2 to 10 volts that these little microelectronics need in order to measure your usage and do all this recording, to do those capabilities. These little devices also run on direct current, DC power. What's coming in is AC, alternating current. So that translation has to take place. This translation, anytime you're damping down the power, you start creating these electrical transients. As David had showed you, the red squiggles, you had the big curve that was the green line, and then you had the little red squiggles. This is why. This is what's causing some of your little red squiggles. You get spikes of high-frequency transients or electromagnetic interference, EMI, and they travel along the building wiring, as David told you, and they're emanating out towards people. And they have been found to have negative health effects. It's been most commonly associated with things like childhood leukemia, but it's not good really for anybody. It results in interference with the other electrical equipment. Again, David talked to you. There's been instances of expensive equipment being burned out, or interference in that things aren't operating properly. And again, this is this electromagnetic interference. And it's not just machines that are bothered by this. Our bodies are electrical equipment as well. We have electrical communications in our bodies, and so our electrical signals are scrambled by this electromagnetic interference. So it's affecting people as well as machinery. In some places, there's an opt-out arrangement where they will give you a meter without the transmitting function, but that's not going to eliminate the switching mode power supply. It's part of how a meter functions. A smart meter must have the switching mode power supply, and the switching mode power supply, as they're currently designed, are causing this kind of electromagnetic interference. As David has talked about things that could change over time, if meter manufacturers wanted to eliminate this, they could put in filters that would filter this out, but that adds cost. So you know how business is, they look for the lowest cost way to do things. The lowest cost way is forget the filter. So the ones right now, to my knowledge, I don't know of any meters that have a filter in them. So an opt-out, the only kind of opt-out that's really going to help you is the analog meter. So what else do we know about what Consumers is doing based on what other utilities are doing and based on the announcements Consumers has put out? Meters are sending out many other messages besides just your measurements. This is electrical equipment, it's networking equipment. They have to sync up with other pieces of equipment in the network. So they're going to be sending out messages, error messages, status messages. They have to synchronize their timing. There's other messages going on besides the 6 times a day that they're getting a transmission about what your usage is. I honestly don't even know how often these other messages go out, but I'm making you aware there's other transmissions. It's not just 6 times a day. Another statement that's been made by various utility companies over the years, over these last several years, is that your smart meter is similar to a cell phone. It's like a cell phone on the side of your house, especially now that you've got Verizon being used as the communication network. But guess what? Cell phones are emitting electromagnetic radiation when they're idle. They're doing that for a couple of reasons. One of the things that they have to do is sync up with the tower, and a cell phone can be moving around, but even though a smart meter is going to be nailed up to the side of your house, the tower could break down, or the meter could break down. The tower needs to know the meter's there, the meter needs to know that the same tower it's used to talking is there. So there's sort of a, hello, are you there? I'm over here. There's sort of the sync up message that goes out periodically. So that kind of a message is going on. There's also a battery reserve capability. This is how a cell phone works, and there's no reason to believe that these radios that are built by the same company that builds cell phone radios are any different. The radios are looking to save power. They don't want to run your battery down any faster than they have to. So they kind of go down in idle mode to minimum capabilities. Part of minimum capabilities means the receiver's turned off. So the receiver has to wake up like every few seconds and go, did anybody call me? Did I hear anything? Is there a text message? Is there a call coming through? So it has to wake up briefly and listen and go, nope, nothing there. Okay, and it goes back to sleep. And then it wakes up, and then it goes back to sleep. So you have this sort of on-off going on with a receiver. And again, that's the way cell phones work. I have every reason to believe that's the way these radios are going to work as well. One of the other interesting things that SmartSync has put out, and I've got at least 2 pieces of paper right with me now, different articles, where SmartSync said that the smart meters are transmitting at 4 times the power of a cell phone. Now that was advertised as, why would a utility want a cell phone carrier on their on the side of their, to be used in their meter when there are places where you get poor cell phone coverage? Well, their answer to poor cell phone coverage was more power. More power to boost the signal so it can make its way to a distant tower. So 4 times the power of a cell phone. And guess what? The World Health Organization, based on looking at cell phone power, had declared wireless transmissions a possible carcinogen. So this is 4 times a possible carcinogen. It's 4 times a cell phone. The SmartSync meters are using 850 and 900 megahertz frequencies. That's just to lead into looking at later about the electromagnetic frequencies. So what's coming? This is what's there today. And people can be lulled into a false sense of security by saying, well, it's 6 times a day. How bad is that? So, okay, it might be a little disruptive when it goes off, but it's only 6 times a day. Heck, that's better than mesh network that's going off all the time. Well, guess what? Qualcomm, who is one of the partners, their chipsets brag that they will enable more real-time exchanges of information to a new wave of smart devices and constant connectivity to ensure an ultra-fast, always-on connection on any device. Doesn't that sound like transmitting all the time? That's what it sounds like to me. GridNet, the software company that they're using, the state of all managed devices, and by state that means is it on, is it off, is it active, is it broken, what state is it in at a given moment. The state of all managed devices is known at all times and connected in a more or less real-time network, talking to a central controller. Guess what? That's always on. That's always transmitting. And guess what? When you're always transmitting, you're always radiating this wireless radiation. So you've got all managed devices. Well, that's back to smart meter, thermostat, appliances, car charger. Now think about not just your smart meter being on all the time, but all your appliances on all the time. All of these radios on all the time. That's the long-range plan. That's what's being bragged about in the press. So when we're talking about this going out all the time, where is out? What are we talking about? Now, this is where I'm looking at two different meters. I'm looking at Itron because that's what we could end up with here with consumers. And the Itron smart meter, this is from an Electric Power Research Institute report in December of 2010, where they did some testing on Itron smart meters, and this is what the radiation pattern looks like. This is known as an omnidirectional antenna. It's going out all directions, like a circle, all the way around the antenna. Now, you will hear from utilities that, well, the metal back on the meter blocks the radiation. Well, there's a metal back on this meter. If you look at the gray in the center of both of those circles, that dark gray, the bottom box, that's the metal back. Does it look like there's radiation behind that metal back? Sure is. It's a little bit less. You see a divot, you see a little, check mark in there, and you will see by the color the intensity is less, but it's not non-existent. There is radiation behind the meter. That means if your bed is on the other side of the wall from the smart meter, you're radiating your head. If your baby's crib is on the other side of that smart meter, you're radiating your baby. Realize there is radiation coming through all the way around those meters. Now they will also say that the house wall is going to block it, and part of that December 2010 EPRI report said, well, if you have a stucco wall, it's going to reduce it by some order of magnitude. How many people in Michigan have stucco walls? Do you know what a stucco wall is made of? Wire mesh with all of this stucco stuck to wire mesh. Metal blocks the radiation. If you've got a cedar siding, if you've got a brick house, you're not blocking the radiation. You don't have metal. So again, realize there is radiation coming from the back of the smart meter. Now here's that other meter, the one they're starting with, GE. These are the antennas that GE got certified with the FCC. The pattern is a little bit different. It's more sort of like a figure 8, but again, there is radiation in all directions around the antenna. So what are the traits of radiation? This microwave radiation I keep talking about. Well, there's the way they talk about the intensity, the way they measure it, they call it power density. The reality is it does drop off sharply. The intensity drops off with increased distance, and they even have a mathematical equation for every time you double the distance, it goes down by 1/4. If you triple the distance, it goes down to 1/9. They've got an equation that measures how much you're going to be exposed to. So that's another statement that they make, is that, well, it's going to be dropping off dramatically, so you're not going to be exposed to that much. Well, here's the reality. One of the other aspects of this radiation is it bounces. These are waves that bounce, and they call it reflection, and it bounces off of hard, smooth surfaces like glass, concrete, polished metal, granite countertops. How many people have granite countertops? Think about your polished stainless appliances. Think about what a normal house looks like. Think about walking down a street. How many plate glass windows are you passing? How much concrete are you walking on? All of these surfaces are bouncing these waves. And what happens when these waves bounce? Emissions are additive. When they intersect, whatever the power is of each of those rays intersecting, it adds together. What if it's 3 rays intersecting or 5 rays intersecting? When they're bouncing, they're going all over the place. The reality is the exposure is a lot higher than what you would expect by their simple little equation that you back up so much and it goes down so much. There's a lot more going on. The other key part here is that damage done by the radio frequencies is cumulative over time. Sunlight is a form of electromagnetic radiation, and think about if you're out in the sun too long the first time in the spring, the first warm day, you get a sunburn. Well, you can take it easy with the sun, but guess what? People who are chronically out in the sun, golfers or farmers or people who get a lot of sun exposure, it's cumulative. Even if you're not getting burnt every time you're going out, the damage is cumulative. And that's true for this electromagnetic radiation. So every little bit you're exposed to, the damage keeps adding up. Now here's what's going on when your little smart meters are going off. And given that the rays are additive, each one of those red circles is the sort of the circle, the rays going out from your smart meter, and every time they add together, you can see the color darkens. When you have 2 circles overlapping, you see it's a little darker. You have 3 circles overlapping, it's darker still. But what about when we get to the future and it's always on? This is what it looks like. This has been referred to as electrosmog. You will be constantly bathed in radiation. And that's also not even considering, that picture wasn't considering all your appliances always on. All the appliances in every house, as well as all of the smart meters, always on. We're looking at a heck of a lot of radiation. Now, this next diagram, this also came out of that Electric Power Research Institute report, and they were looking at recording this power density over time in a neighborhood out in a real town that had smart meters. I put the little stars on the tops of those blue spikes, and that's sort of the peak emissions, and this was in a mesh network. And again, they're not going off as often as this always on that we're going to get to, but so you have these peak emissions. The green is what is known as averaged measurements. That's how power density is measured. They average it over a 30-minute time period. So when you have a meter going off, and then a few seconds it's quiet, and then it goes off, and then it's quiet, all of those quiet zeros are added in with the big number. So the blue spikes are the real momentary spike of radiation. The green is when it's averaged. That's the numbers that get reported. Do you know how big the difference is? This is a logarithmic scale. This is like when you have earthquakes and you have the scale that goes up by 10-fold each time you go up. So every 10 increase on this scale is a 10-fold increase. You go from the top of the green to the top of the blue, it's 10,000 times. So your actual exposure is 10,000 times the numbers you're going to see quoted as measurements, because the measurements are averaged. Now, they will also tell you that people have been living with electromagnetic radiation since the beginning of time. There's all kinds of naturally occurring electromagnetic radiation. Well, that's true. The Earth puts out its own electromagnetic radiation. It's called the Schumann resonance. It's about 7.86 hertz. Your heartbeat's about 1 to 2 hertz. Sleeping brain waves, 2 to 4. Your awake brain, when you're actively doing something, is about 8 to 13. So overall, your human cells are vibrating with electromagnetic radiation at a rate of about 0 to 22 hertz. Notice these are small numbers. The above are known as extremely low frequencies, ELF. Also, they are continuous waves. These are waves that are going on without zeros in between, without silences. What you get with the electromagnetic radiation from man-made sources is pulsed. It's very, very different, and the effects on the body are very, very different. Here's your electromagnetic spectrum. Way off on the left are these little tiny ones that are what you have that is naturally occurring. Now, sunlight is naturally occurring, and that would be in the visible range, which is about in the middle of that chart. So yes, sunlight is a much higher frequency, however, it's also continuous wave. It's doing damage, you can get skin cancer, but it is continuous wave, and it's not as damaging as pulsed, and it's not as damaging as anything that's going up on the higher end, that ionizing radiation. But this is all non-ionizing radiation that we're talking about at the left end. So what does radiation do to you? What are the biological effects of the high-frequency electromagnetic? Well, for one, there's disruption of your cell communications. The testing has shown, scientific studies have shown that the calcium ions that are involved in cells communicating with each other get disrupted. So the messages your cells are telling each other to turn a process on or turn a process off are going to be garbled. There's damage to DNA. It's not the kind of damage that you get from an X-ray. It's not breakage like a sledgehammer. It's more like breakage from a virus fed into a computer. It's a different kind of damage. It sort of melts the glue in the DNA and it just sort of dissolves and the pieces come apart. It's a different approach, a different manner of breaking. It still breaks DNA. Lots of studies, scientific, peer-reviewed studies have shown it breaks DNA. Broken DNA leads to long-term increase in cancer, and that's why as you get more and more broken DNA, as this damage is accumulating over time, you have a bigger and bigger risk of cancer. What the World Health Organization had said is that 10 years plus exposure to the cell phones could lead to cancer. It affects the, that's a good word, electroencephalogram and blood-brain flow. The idea here is that there is this sort of a sheath, a coating on your brain called the blood-brain barrier, and it's supposed to keep bad things out. However, electromagnetic radiation makes it permeable. And so when your body has small amounts of toxins in it that normally would never get to the brain because this sheath, this coating protects the brain, it's not protecting the brain anymore. When you're exposed to electromagnetic radiation, you're much more susceptible to other toxins and diseases that are out there in the world. One of the other things studies have found is the creation of, they either call them heat shock proteins because they first looked at it in terms of heat, but overall they call them stress proteins. This study was called Reflex. It was a study done in 2004. What they found in this study is that the electromagnetic frequencies activate one of the instructions in DNA. The instruction says when something is threatening the cell, you put up your shield. The shield is a protein coating. So it's this existence of this protein that they call heat shock protein or stress protein. You see it when there's a chemical assault, you see it with a heat assault, you see it with EMFs. Your body is telling you EMFs are bad. EMFs are a threat to the health of the cell, and that's why they put in the heat shock protein. If there's unrelenting exposure, the cells put a thicker and thicker layer of this heat shock protein until nothing gets in and nothing gets out. No food gets in, no nutrients get in, and any of the waste doesn't get out, and the cell has premature death. So heat shock proteins are a way to protect itself, but unless they get a time period to recover, unless they get a break from this constant onslaught of EMFs, it's going to mean premature cell death. So what kind of symptoms do people experience? David talked about the electro-hypersensitivity, EHS, but there's a host of symptoms that people get. And David didn't touch on one of the other aspects of EHS, and that is studies have shown that more and more people are becoming electrosensitive, particularly in countries where they have had cell phones the longest. So in places like Norway and Sweden and some parts of Europe, they are finding the percentages of people with electrosensitivity are much higher. In fact, there was an Irish actually, it was an Irish presentation, but it was Oberfeld, I think is the name of the scientist who was from Austria, who did a study and tracked all these different countries where they looked at how many people, how many reports of EHS they had over time, predicted by 2017, 50%, 50%